tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So we are exploring the Heart Sūtra. We've been digesting the core teachings of the perfection of wisdom that really revolve around this extraordinary vision of the insubstantiality or the profound interwoven nature of everything. And so in the summary text of the perfection of wisdom, known as the heart of the perfection of wisdom, the text opens with the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in deep meditation, exploring the aggregates or the khanda, skanda in Sanskrit, and seeing that they're empty, and in that seeing being freed from suffering. So then Avalokiteshvara, whose fundamental nature as a bodhisattva is devoted to the quality of compassion. Avalokiteshvara is also Kuan Yin, so this is one of Kuan Yin's texts. Kuan Yin then in meditation speaks aloud, or psychically, who knows, but like speaks to the monk Śariputra. In the early system, it's Śariputra, the marshal of the Dhamma, one of the Buddha's two foremost disciples, the one known as the foremost in wisdom. So of course he's the recipient of the perfection of wisdom teachings. And Avalokiteshvara, from the depths of the meditation on emptiness, says, "Oh Śariputra, in this understanding that I'm coming to, in this teaching, in this body of teachings, in this lineage," or we might even just say, in this state that I'm now knowing, form is empty. And when you say form, Śariputra knows exactly what you mean. So, oh, form. Form is the first of the khanda. So form, feeling or affect, perception, formations or choices, consciousness itself, sense consciousness. Avalokiteshvara says form is empty, but emptiness also is the nature of form. Right? It's not just that emptiness is somehow a quality that form holds, but that emptiness is also something manifest, and that emptiness manifests as form. This is a way of saying that emptiness isn't like a costume or a decoration or a kind of description of a thing. Like form exists and an adjective to describe it is empty. But it's more like there's this experience of things being solid, bodies, other bodies, objects. And that this experience of the realness of things, this is emptiness showing up. So form is empty, emptiness is form. And then deepens it, form is not other than emptiness. There's not a thing that is form here, like a body, that where any part of it is not empty, but also, again, empty is not an adjective. Empty is more like one of the words for the true nature of this thing that has arisen as form. This starts to feel like language play, so don't let it get your logical mind into a tizzy. But what's being put forward here is that there's the manifest, and then there's the recognition of how manifestation in a way works. That form appears and disappears, that form is changing all the time. And then, Avalokiteshvara says it's the same with feelings, with perceptions, with formations, with with consciousness. All of these things have the nature of emptiness. They are empty. Emptiness is them. And so we have this description of our phenomenal experience as being empty at its core. Empty of what? Right? Empty of the Sanskrit word is swabhava. Swa means like of oneself, and bhava means being or nature, like self-nature, empty of being a permanent entity. And permanent is a philosophical way of saying separate from other things. And so all of the aggregates, the khanda, have this nature of being completely inseparable from anything else. They're part of the phenomenal arising of things. So having given that initial burst of download to Śariputra, Avalokiteshvara then says what in a way is the core or the pith teaching of the perfection of wisdom. And the Sanskrit is sarvadharmāḥ śūnyatālakṣaṇā. All dharmas, sarva is all, dharma is dharmas plural, there's a long A on the end, dharmāḥ. All dharmas, and dharmas here, this doesn't just mean the dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. Dharma also is a word that broadly means things, entities, experiences. So everything, essentially, all dharmas, really like all experiences that could possibly arise in consciousness. And so that sums up all the khanda, right? All of the form, all the feelings, all the perceptions, all the formations, all the moments of sense consciousness at all dharmas are śūnyatālakṣaṇā. Śūnyata is emptiness, the quality of emptiness, the characteristic of emptiness. And lakṣaṇā is the Sanskrit version of the Pali term lakṣaṇā. And lakṣaṇā you might know from the term tilakkhana, the three characteristics. Characteristics is the usual translation. It literally means like marks. And the three marks, or the three characteristics, traditionally are impermanence, suffering, and selflessness, or not self. So anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering or pain or unsatisfactoriness or dissatisfactoriness, and anatta, the selfless, not possessing an atta, a kind of swabhava, a soul, essentially a self-nature. So we have this traditional list of the characteristics: impermanence, suffering. I'll use suffering. I don't love that translation. Impermanence, impermanent, unsatisfying, and selfless. That's sort of grammatically, I like that. For the characteristics, everything is impermanent, everything is unsatisfying, and everything is without a self, without a solid, separate identity, without solidness. These are the three marks, and Avalokiteshvara says all dharmas are marked using the same term. All dharmas are marked by emptiness. And part of how I understand emptiness then as a characteristic is that first we can understand it as a characteristic that's similar to the others. So you could take impermanence and you could say, use impermanence as an object of inquiry or a way to look at any experience, particularly one that's causing me some distress or is, seems weighty or seems very real. Take the political moment, because why not, right? We're in this big fat election up here in the United States, and if you're not paying attention, I don't know what you're paying attention to right now, but people are debating, and memes are flying around, and piles of money are pouring in all directions, and it's important, right? Like how democracies come up with the structures for caring for their people really matters. It matters who we elect. It matters how those people govern. This is like solid, real stuff with real consequences. Some people get elected and they go to war. Other people get elected and they stop wars. Some people direct money to the wealthy. Some people direct money to the poor. Voting has consequences, right? So this is an example of something that's real, it's substantial, it has impact, and it's on your mind, probably, in some way. And it's empty, right? It's impermanent. That's what I was going to go with the first characters. Let's go with impermanent. So impermanent, what does that mean with this? We could say, okay, in what way is the election impermanent? Like, very obviously, it's impermanent in this kind of temporal story of our lives in this country, etc. Right? The election is in November. The inauguration is in January. All manner of shit will probably go down between now, where we just had like the second weirdly minor assassination attempt. I don't know if an assassination attempt is ever minor of a presidential candidate in this cycle. And it's just going to keep going until January sometime at least, right? That's what it looks like. But that's temporary, right? That's a few months away. Somewhere in the middle of that stretch of hyper dramatic months, my kid will turn 9, and right near the end of that whole thing, a few days after the inauguration, may it go peacefully, I will turn 54, and God willing, I'm still that old, like alive. You all will be 4 months older than this, and everything will just keep pouring forward into the future, right? Slipping into the future, as the song says. So impermanent, in one way, is super obvious. Like, yeah, it's impermanent. But the point of the meditation on impermanence is to liberate. The point of all of the Dharma is to liberate. And so in what way might the reflection on the impermanence of the political moment, in what way might it liberate? Right? That's how could we actually use the characteristic of emptiness as a practice pointing toward liberation? And this is partly why I think the study of history broadly is so powerful. To understand that how empires rise and fall, and how people migrate across the globe, and how things change very quickly sometimes, and so we reflect then on impermanence, and we could say this experience, the Dharma that we call the election, is impermanent. Okay. One of the ways that the reflection on impermanence can move is that it can point out to us the ways that our grasping has gotten has become affected by delusion in some ways, And this is delicate because, like, taking something like the election, I'm choosing it particularly because I do actually think it's important, right? It's consequential, very much so. And so it would be bypass to say, like, oh, it's impermanent, therefore I have permission to check out in some way. Like, I'm going to ignore it, right? Ignoring something doesn't lessen its impact. If anything, it just takes you out of the possibility of doing something wholesome in relation to it. Sometimes action is the wholesome thing to do. Sometimes other kinds of action, including stillness, are wholesome. But impermanent doesn't mean not real or not important, but it does mean impermanent. And so there's a way that our anxiety can get really whipped up around something that's important, like an election, and we can forget the flow of history and time. I've already cried during this election cycle, watching bits of news and politicians speaking and seeing results of various things come through. And the last time I cried at an election actually was at the election night counting party where my candidate lost. And it was the San Francisco mayor's race between the Green Party upstart, my guy, Matt Gonzalez, if anybody remembers him, and Gavin Newsom, when Gavin Newsom won his first election to become mayor of San Francisco. I guess this must have been in the late 90s or something, early aughts. And I had volunteered for Matt Gonzalez because it was the first time in my life that a local politician actually felt like me, felt like my tribe, seemed like someone I could actually trust. And he was one of those people where you're like, there's no way this young Green Party politician is going to somehow magically suddenly become mayor of San Francisco. This is the wildest thing ever. And he didn't. He actually won the vote on election night. But Newsom's people had a better ground game, and they had pre mail-in ballots from a much more diverse constituency, including a whole bunch of old folks' homes that they had gotten all tied up for Newsom. So anyway, ancient history. But in that moment, it was crushing. We had really believed in this this moment that somehow this very progressive candidate could sweep away the corruption and step in his ill-fitting, essentially thrift store suit into the mayor's office, that had been Willie Brown had just put extra gold trim on the civic center, and a hipster punk was gonna move in, and we were just thrilled. I was thrilled, and he lost, and I cried, and I went home to the mission, and I was like, well, that was the closest I ever got, So and that was impermanent. And now, what is it, 30 years later or something, and Newsom is doing a completely different thing on the national stage, and I'm like, oh yeah, it just keeps moving. All dharmas are marked by impermanence, and so things matter, and they pass, and there's a particular wisdom in understanding how to hold the passingness of things. And I think this is not radically different from what comes with age anyway. The kind of perspective that sees, children born and old people die, and administrations come and go. And everything changes, Dick Cheney just endorsed Kamala Harris. I'm like, Dick Cheney? That guy? To keep flashing back to San Francisco, there was a San Francisco mime troupe show once upon a time. They're our sort of radical lefty puppetry and musical theater mime troupe kind of people. For those who don't know the San Francisco mime troupe, you can look them up on YouTube or something. Super classic, very 70s kind of vibe. And they did a show somewhere in the George W. Bush era, kind of in the Iraq War era. And they had Bush as a kind of minor villain, this sort of twee, useless, not smart kind of villain. And behind him was Dick Cheney as this kind of as the king vampire, Anyway, so, here comes Cheney out of retirement to endorse Kamala, and I'm like, where am I? The wheel has just kept turning, So the characteristic then of emptiness is a liberating meditation because it asks us to step out of the perception that any given moment and its drama is solid. And dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, in a way does the same thing. It says the thing that you were searching for in any experience that you thought was going to be the thing, this is going to be satisfying, this is going to solve a problem. Very much in the same way, like there are things that solve problems. Like there are concrete things that are painful that can be solved in various ways, or at least addressed skillfully. Again, I'm just going to keep going with the election, right? Like it matters who wins. There will be different kinds of suffering for different kinds of people depending on who wins. I clearly have a team that I'm on, so forgive me if I'm overly partisan here. But it's true in all directions. If you want somebody to do something and you're attached to that, there's going to be some dissatisfaction, and like politics is the most unsatisfying game around. You win, and then your heroes proceed to fail mostly to accomplish the thing you wanted them to do, because there's no winning. There's just like a moment of a slight shift on this side or that of the political center, right? Like the planet, very, very slightly shifting in its seasons. The opening of Richard III. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by the son of York. Right? Two political parties are in contention, and this is the leader of the party that's out of power in this moment, saying, the season is shifted, right? For the other party, it's summer, but for us, we've descended into the winter of our discontent. Now is the season of dukkha, he's saying, we're about to swing into the winter of discontent for one party or the other. May it be the correct one. Anyway, so dukkha. Again, dukkha is completely tied to anicca, right? The suffering or painfulness is tied to impermanence, because it's at its heart, dukkha is a resistance to impermanence. It's a way of saying that the good thing, I demand that it last somehow. Can't we just get into power and stay there, and like keep the bad people on the outside of the city walls? No. There, and it just doesn't work, right? And so dukkha is, everything is marked by dukkha. The beautiful, wonderful, successful things are marked by their impending loss, whether they last for this whole lifetime or a couple of centuries of drama, drama, the drama of a great empire. They fall, and sometimes they fall quite quickly. It also means that the terrible things don't last, right? So dukkha, like impermanence, is good, also, or it's neither good nor bad. It's just true, right? But don't interpret it only in terms of loss, but also recognize that the painful also ends, because the seasons always are swinging, right? So you've got this seasonal swing. You've got what the Buddha called the worldly winds. He uses a weather metaphor for the swing between gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute, the political sphere. You see the worldly wind of praise and blame, fame and disrepute, these two. So the worldly winds are these four sets, these four dyads that the psyche takes as, the thing I want, the thing I don't want, right? Pleasure, pain, gain, loss, success, failure, And it's like we're always swinging between these. You can't park yourself in any one of those for very long. And honestly, you can't even control which one of those you have for very long. Otherwise, you would just choose the best and stay there. I know you're trying. Blessings to you for trying to do that. I'm also trying to do that, and it keeps fluctuating. And so the last of the characteristics then is the selfless, anatta. Nothing is solid, and it's just a logical conclusion of the other two. Really, everything is a logical conclusion upon impermanence, because it's completely changing. There can't be a solid core in anything, because if there was a solid core, that core would have to be definable somehow, and if it was definable somehow, it would have to be consistent. But it's just not. There's not a solid core to the personal self, and you just keep changing, right? Different time, different conditions, different body. It keeps changing. There's no there. And so emptiness, so these are the three classical characteristics. Emptiness then, Avalokiteshvara says, is a characteristic in the same way. And the thing I want to land us with is that emptiness is a way of expressing the natural implication of these original three. That if something is impermanent and therefore impossible to satisfy in any lasting way, and therefore can't be said to have a permanent or abiding core, one word for that is empty. It's empty of permanence. It's empty of a kind of reliability, and it's empty of any kind of a self. Some people think that emptiness really is just an elaboration of the teaching on anatta, of selflessness. That it's not just that you are selfless or that specific experiences are selfless, but every dharma of any kind, every thing or entity that can be identified by the senses is selfless. And so then empty is just a way of describing this radical openness that everything kind of possesses. Open's not quite the right word, because things open, they close. It's not that. You get into the non-dual bind here, where empty is a way of pointing to there not being anything you can, in the words of the Perfection of Wisdom texts, take a stand on. You can't take a stand on anything. Right? If you try, it shifts under your feet. Even the fact that I am obviously, a partisan Democrat in our present moment political world, flash back 150 years to the Reconstruction period, and the Democrats were the slave owners trying to hold on to power in the South, and the Republicans were the anti-slavery party of the North. So confusing for people, who just dip their toes into that history, and they're like, wait, what's my team again? Every time we go to a sports show, River says, who are we voting for this time? Are we voting for the Warriors? And at some point we're watching the Olympics or something, and the teams playing are like completely not us. It's like I don't know, it's like France versus Brazil or something. And River's like, who are we voting for? Somehow he hasn't figured out voting, rooting. I'm down. I'm like, who are we voting for? And I'm like, I don't know, France, Brazil, I don't know. And I'm like, I don't know, let's do Brazil. Let's vote for Brazil. And he says, which one is closer to here? Which one is closer to us? He's figured out, at some point we were watching basketball, and it was like the Warriors and the Lakers or something. And he's like, who are we voting for? And I'm like, I don't know, the Warriors have Steph Curry, and they're like just down the way. And he's like, yeah, I'm like, but the Lakers, they're also in California. They've got LeBron. And he's like, who am I voting for? And so, it just changes, it just keeps changing. And so, so empty. And so here's the last piece, then we get to, in the text, then, so there's this line, iha śāriputra, in this teaching or in this lineage, all dharmas are marked by emptiness. Sarvadharmāḥ, śūnyatālakṣaṇā. All experiences are marked by emptiness. And then he says, neither caused nor ended. Right? So there's impermanence, right? Neither caused nor ended. Things aren't actually just impermanent, but they neither like appear and disappear as if they really existed for some moment. They're neither impure nor pure. I think this points to dukkha in a certain way. There's not like a kind of like, this is impure, or like, you're going to suffer, or this is pure, pleasant, something like that. They're neither impure nor pure. And they're neither partial nor whole, which I think hints at anatta, at the self. They're neither a strand in the infinite web, as if that strand is real and the web is somehow real and we're all a part of some big real thing. Nor are we, a singular whole soul, contained entity. So we're selfless, but also don't reify, interconnected, as if we are a bunch of substantial, real, phenomenal things that come together, like the 5 disparate lions of Voltron or something, and together we are greater than the sum of our separate parts. I'm all pop culture today, not all American culture, but there's a bit of Voltron from my childhood for you. 5 superheroes who each ride 5 differently colored robot lions, and in the climax of every show, they come together to form one enormous fighting robot. And we were all like, wow, the Japanese really know how to be communal, Voltron. It's like emptiness is like, yeah, it's not that. It's not that like we each play our part. It's more radically blown open than that, right? Neither partial nor whole. You're not partial. There's not something that's incomplete about you because you're impermanent, selfless, and unsatisfactory. Neither is there something fundamentally complete about you where you might stumble into a view that you have a kind of divine, perfect, singular self also that's pure somehow. Emptiness says don't fall into either of those extremes. This is really a middle way teaching. And this is why this is the heart of what came to be called the Madhyamaka, the middle way. Because either of those extremes solidifies the self around a concept. And if you don't do that, I think you are invited to practice. And again, this is just a practice. This is just something to walk around the world embodying. You're invited to practice a kind of ecosystemic permeability. How do I meet other people from a place of not fixating them or myself, while also not abandoning things that are functionally important in the world, like proper boundaries and knowing whose stuff is whose, and how to do relationships skillfully. Again, and this was said beautifully in the chat here, impermanent doesn't mean inconsequential, right? Empty doesn't mean without wise, tending of relationships, appropriate boundaries, appropriate openness, all of those good things that are the definition of our relative relationships. But there's an invitation to know ourselves. All of these words are now in scare quotes. To know ourselves in the phenomenal world in a different way, with a different kind of Dogen would say intimacy with all things. All right, so we'll pause there.